Coming up on this week's show, a famous Nintendo character is found in a classic Sega game.
BioShock gets demade.
And we chat to Stephen Leary from Terrible Fire about turbocharging your old systems.
The Retro Hour podcast is brought to you each week with our good mates at Bitmap Books. Now, you should know by now, they give you the best retro gaming books, and one that you need to check out is The Games That Weren't, celebrating some of the best video games that never made it out onto the market, covering the Atari 2600 right up until the PlayStation 4, arcade games, home computer, consoles, handhelds, and lots more as well. This has been years in the making and is their biggest and most ambitious project to date. Check it out and their full range of retro gaming books at bitmapbooks.co.uk. Hello and welcome to the Retro Hour podcast, episode number 295, your weekly dose of retro gaming and technology news with me, Dan Wood.
Me, Ravi Abbott.
And me, Joe Fox.
And a very warm welcome to this week's show, or should it be a slightly chilly welcome to this week's show, being that it is our first episode of October, amazingly.
Ooh, spooky.
No, actually, my missus has been coming home every day. She's on a lunch break. Oh, I just went to Wilco's or went to BMI. I've come home with some more Halloween decorations. I don't know what she thinks we're doing on Halloween this year.
Apparently you're having a big Halloween party for your...
apparently so.
In your new studio.
Well, I was actually thinking what I might do on Halloween this year, because I've got a new home studio that's kind of nearly finished now. Thinking I might maybe stream on our Twitch a few classic Halloween video games.
Oh,
yeah. If Ravi will give me the keys.
You boys love Halloween. I just spend it like trying to hide from trick-or-treaters. It's just a night in where I eat some cheap chocolate and hide.
You know, I was looking actually the other day for, weird things came up on my Facebook page. It's kind of this projector that you put in your window that puts pumpkins and ghosts and all that kind of thing on there. This guy said for the first time in 10 years, he didn't get any trick-or-treaters last year because everyone's too scared to knock on his door. So maybe that's
social distancing. You chuck the sweets at them. You were growing some pumpkins, weren't you, Dan? Are you going to be using them this year?
No, I think I grew a weed instead of a pumpkin. It didn't come out quite as expected, but I'm looking forward to sitting in. We've got a bit of a tradition. I mean, Joe's the same. You normally get your Resident Evil games on. I tend to play Alone in the Dark. That's one of my Halloween traditions that I play that game. Seventh Guest, I was playing last year on the CDI as well. It's a good season, when it's getting cold and the nights are getting longer, just to sit in and play a few horror games. It is a good excuse to do it, I think.
Yeah, man. I always do a post on our Instagram as well, which I need to do more of. But I always do a post these are the games we're playing, and every time me and Dan have always got something we're playing Resident Evil, playing Alone in the Dark, and Ravi's always like, oh Jesus, something
Civilization free.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're into that season now, and obviously, when we're indoors a lot more at this time of year because it's cold here in the UK, we generally spend more time tinkering with our machines, and Ravi and I in particular, we're quite big fans of upgrading our classic computers and, a few consoles as well. And today we're going to be joined by someone who's really an enabler for all that, isn't he? This is Stephen Leary from the Terrible Fire project. Now, you and I, Ravi, have been big fans of Terrible Fire's cards, for the Amiga in particular, over the last half a decade or so now. Don't know about you, I think I've got about 4 of his cards in different machines.
Yeah, I've got a couple as well. And you know what? They're not as bad as the name suggests. You're not going to set fire to your system.
I always thought that wasn't the best branding for something that you're going to put in a 30-year-old computer.
But yeah, they are fire. They're wicked. See, down with the kids. They're basically open source hardware accelerators. And the really cool thing about Terrible Fire is there is just one man doing it on his own. He's got help from some wonderful people like Super Duper who also help him out. But he creates these cards for kind of fun and just to get more out of your system. And they've really helped a lot of people, and a lot of people are using them in their systems. But he kind of mainly focuses on Amiga, but he's also known for working on other systems. So we're going to be chatting to Stephen about Amiga, of course, because, we love that system, but also the MSX. He's creating a full MSX clone. He's doing stuff that's now benefiting the Atari as well, which is absolutely awesome. And a new thing that he's doing as well is, arcade machines, a lot of the chips aren't in production anymore. So he's actually making little replacement chips that you can slot into your arcade machine and kind of keep these old boards going. He's all about kind of pushing stuff far past their limits and doing it with hardware. It's pretty amazing, to be honest.
And I think you made a really good point there that what he does, all of these projects he makes are open source. So there are people who actually make these cards and they sell them for, usually not really much profit. So they're very affordable. Because, speaking as, you and I being Amiga fans, it did get to a stage where even a very simple upgrade for the Amiga, the prices were ridiculous, weren't they, for like second-hand hardware? So it's something that was especially needed. And the fact that he came out with these cards, I've got a couple in the CD32, and the one I've got next to me here, it's got the Terrible Fire card in the back of my CD32, plugs in the back. I've got a little compact flash card in there, with an SD card adapter, actually. So I've got pretty much every Amiga game on there. It's got some extra memory on board as well, so it can play the more demanding games. It's got no 30 to speed up the console. So really, I use that as my ultimate Amiga gaming setup. I've got pretty much every Amiga game installed. You turn the machine on, a menu loads up, select them from the joypad, and you're good to go, which makes something like the CD32 infinitely better than it was originally.
Well, there was a time when people were buying Amiga cards and they were accelerators, and you're right, they were expensive, but also they were old. And there's other people doing cards out there as well, but Stevens ones were really cheap and accessible. And the fact that you can actually get new hardware really interested us, and it's opened up the market. It's opened up the market to lower range, cheaper Amiga accelerators. And if you just want a little bit of extra kick to be able to, just like you said, play all of the games, kind of WHD load games, and get them going, they're absolutely ideal. And there's a lot of love out there for Terrible Fire stuff, and he's always creating something crazy. You always see a prototype and you're like, what the hell, how does that work, or what's coming next? So we're going to be talking to Stephen all about his inventions and ideas, because it's just amazing. One single person doing this, and this is a kind of thing that we couldn't have dreamed of years ago in the Amiga community.
Yeah, so he's a real credit to the retro community, and he's got an interesting YouTube channel as well that, a lot of it goes way over my head, but I really enjoy watching it. So Stephen Leary from Terrible Fire is going to be our special guest on the show in around 25 minutes from now. Now let's jump straight into the stories this week. This was really cool. Now, I'm a big fan of the game BioShock. I don't know if you guys have played that. I had it on the original Xbox, and that was kind of around the time I got back into video games in a big way, around 2007, 2008. And I remember sinking so much time into that game, and it having one of the best stories and, really immersive atmosphere. Again, would be a good game to play on Halloween, actually. But maybe you want to play it with a bit of a spin. Someone's actually recreated BioShock as a kind of a 16-bit side-scrolling game.
Yeah, so I've never actually played BioShock. I'm familiar with them. I am familiar with them, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ravi might know, but aren't half the team of time splitters involved with this as well in BioShock?
I'm not sure about that, but I think BioShock, when it came out, it was so stylish, and it had that kind of Jetsons future retro kind of vibe, 1950s. It's
very steampunk, isn't it?
I don't think the Fallout series would have kind of existed without BioShock having that foundation of the new modern Fallout stuff.
Oh, I was going to say, I was a bit like, well, Fallout came a lot before BioShock. So good save there. This comes from a YouTuber who, the article's saying everywhere, and, I think even his video says his videos just put it as a 2D version.
I think he retitled it originally, says, I attempt to create BioShock for the Super Nintendo. That's kind of the original title. It's in the description on this video. It's a guy called Thomas Brush, isn't it?
And, and they're saying, it's in the vein of a Mega Drive / SNES game, which I get, but this game looks way too advanced for the SNES or the Mega Drive. It looks a little bit more like Little Nightmares you compared to, didn't you, Dan? A lot of these kind of put 2.5D kind of games.
But they look very high resolution still, don't they?
Yeah, really high resolution, really, really nice, smooth graphics. But this looks really cool. He's made it into a 16-bit-esque 2D action platformer run and gun, hasn't he? And, from what I understand, like I say, I'm not a big BioShock guy. I don't know much about them. Maybe I'll play them this Halloween. Maybe it's like you say, a good game to play. It looks like he's really captured the BioShock kind of vein of it, the element of it. I know the game's set in an underwater city and everything, and it looks like he's nailed that, with the gameplay and how it looks in the style of the game.
Well, it was this kind of fantasy world called the Rapture.
Yeah.
And you've had post-apocalyptic stuff before, but this had a kind of a grand feel to it, and it was like a kind of Atlantis, like kind of undiscovered Jetsons world. And he's really, really done well with it, especially the underground sections, because when you start off with BioShock, you going underwater in a kind of submarine, and then you enter this world. It's a nice platformer. It's definitely not SNES. It's much more advanced than that, but he's got a shooting style with the mouse, like you said, and that's a lot like Abuse. Do you remember Abuse? I always say everything's like Abuse, don't I?
I know what you mean. Look, this kind of matches that kind of dark atmosphere of BioShock. I think he's captured that quite well with like the colour palette he's used and the pacing and everything.
Yeah, the
kind of
curves and the kind of gold and that kind of look.
It does remind me, though, of something like, these kind of modern, what are meant to be retro games, they say retro-inspired on modern consoles that, always look a little bit too smooth. You knew that something like the Super Nintendo couldn't have run this, but some people are saying in the comments on the YouTube video, you've got a good starting point for it, and it's great now. You could play it on the Switch, and it'd be really at home on that, but it would be cool if maybe you could downgrade it a bit more into like pixel-style graphics, which probably would be doable, I think, with the foundation that he's got there.
Yeah, totally, and I think it needs a bit more plants, and it does look industrial, but we've only seen a few like little levels that we've got there on it. It's another good use of the Unreal Engine. We keep seeing amazing things being made and made by individuals as well. It's not big teams and stuff. This is really awesome.
Yeah, so it's nothing you can download at the moment, but it is available if you want to check out that video.
If we get Brian Fargo on the podcast, I hope he doesn't kill me about what I said about Fallout.
He will now. You've drawn attention to it. He was going to come on till that. He's all right. Forget those guys.
Forget that now.
Yeah. So, if you want to check that out, I'll link it up in our show notes. What about this then, the MSX that we were talking about just then, and we will be going more in depth with Stephen Leary about the MSX, because like you mentioned, he's actually doing a clone of that machine. We've kind of covered it. We actually did a couple of episodes about the MSX before, and actually, weirdly, I got my hands on one and had a proper play with an MSX for really the first time. I mean, I've just kind of played them for a couple of minutes before, but I sat down for about an hour with one at the weekend. And this is a new game that not only can you play online, but also they're taking pre-orders for a full MSX version of it, and this is a fantasy game called The Fall of Prometheus.
Yeah, so from what I understand, this game kind of started development in like 2017, as a fan-made game for the MSX, and it looks really like, I'm not too familiar with the MSX. I know it's an 8-bit game, but it captures what it's going for really well. It looks like kind of like a Greek mythology puzzle game. Which
we wondered if it was an RPG, because it looks a bit like an RPG.
It does look a bit like kind of like a Zelda clone, doesn't it? But apparently it's a 30-screen puzzle game. Each screen is a different puzzle, where by the looks of things, I want to say like push blocks and stuff like that to kind of figure out how to get through the level. And it does look like there is enemies knocking about and stuff in there as well. And it's divided into 3 different worlds. You've got the Tantos world, the Garden of Hesperides, and then also a secret mythological theme world as well. And like you say, this is currently playable online for free.
Yeah,
and
in your browser.
In your browser, which is really, really cool. And then if you really like the game, you can buy it on a physical, big box edition for the MSX for €26, which I think is pretty reasonable, because a lot of these games, which are usually quite reasonable as well, come out at like €50, 50 quid. So I think 26 is pretty reasonable if you really like the game, but it's awesome that it's there for you just to play in browser as well.
Well, if you want to check out what it looks like on the MSX, the version that you play online actually launches in an MSX emulator.
Oh, wow, cool.
So it's actually the actual game that you play on here.
That actually fits in with the theme of today's guest.
Well, it is amazing, because I love these puzzle games back in the day. There was one that I used to play on my Commodore 64 called Fire Ant that I tried to revisit about 2 years ago and got completely lost. I don't think I could get off the second screen. But I remember being like, a little kid about 7, 8 years old, sitting there with my mum, and we'd spend so much time on it. And a lot of the time you just randomly figure things out. You had no internet. I didn't even have magazines with it in. You just spent a lot of time on it and actually figured out how the game worked and these kind of hidden little secrets. So there is something very satisfying about when you finally do solve a puzzle in a game like this, particularly if it's anything like that. I mean, I haven't actually sat down and played the online version yet, but I probably will actually after we finish recording today. But if it's anything like that and it's got those kind of, the challenges that are kind of up to the standard of other 8-bit games, that require a bit of thought, there is something very rewarding when you do finally figure stuff out and get past the screen.
Yeah, definitely.
And you've got enemies in here like Cyclops, gargoyles as well. So yeah, very mythical looking game. I love the colour palette of it as well. Because at the MSX, like I said, I've not got a lot of experience with it, but very vibrant colours.
Yeah, I think, like you said, the theme of it is none of us have much experience with it. It's a very Japanese, system, wasn't it? But it's cool when things like this come along for people like us who don't have that experience with it to kind of experience a little bit. Like, I know it's a homebrew game. It's not an actual original MSX game, but it gives us, a little bit, it gives us an experience to actually play, a game that would have run on it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think today, we talk about it on the Amstrad scene as well, the fact that people have had these systems and they know so much about them now that they can do stuff that you couldn't have done 35 years ago on that machine because people didn't know all the tricks of the hardware, and now they've really got it nailed. So I think a lot of the time we're seeing some of the best games ever come out on these old systems now. So definitely worth backing, homebrew stuff like that as well. The fact that you can buy a box version of it, you support these projects, and there'll be more of them out there. So definitely worth having a look at that. I will link that up if you want to check it out in our show notes. Now, this is something that, particularly at this time, isn't something I thought I would have seen. This is something else that's come out of the Project Deluge that we were talking about from Hidden Palace last week. We talked about those prototype Dreamcast games, like 135 of them that were discovered. This project that aims to get like betas and unreleased games and unreleased ports and tech demos all put together so people can check them out. Now, this is a Dreamcast prototype of Sega GT, the racing game that features a famous Nintendo character.
Yeah, Project Deluge is just like the gift that keeps on giving. And I did say last week, like, I'm sure we'll cover some more interesting things from it over the next couple of weeks.
Soon, though.
So yeah, this is Sega GT for the Dreamcast. And obviously, at this point, Sega and Nintendo were still big enemies, still kind of like playground chat. So obviously this is probably just a tongue-in-cheek thing that Sega put in the game and then obviously had to kind of remove before the game came out. But yeah, Luigi... in the unreleased like demo version of the game, an early build of the game, is the what do you call him in a race? The flag waver, the flag bearer at the.
He starts a race with a checkered flag.
Yeah, he starts a race with the checkered flag, and there's a very funny, stretched looking version of Luigi kind of waving you off in an early build of this game, which I think is hilarious.
Now, I was a fan of Sega Rally. I don't know much about Sega GT. Was this another part of the series?
It was more of a sim kind of game, wasn't it? It was more of not like a straight up arcade racer. It was kind of the equivalent to Gran Turismo.
I was going to say it was a competitor to Gran Turismo because of the level that they're actually even playing it on. Is called Sony GT2, which is actually a reference to Gran Turismo 2 as well, with a really odd looking map, which I thought was trying to look like Luigi as well, the shape of the map. So yeah, quite a few references in just this one screenshot of the level.
I wonder how he ended up in here though. That must have just been Sega developers, maybe after a few beers one night going, I know what would be funny.
Yeah, I imagine they just kind of made him and stuck him there as a placeholder until, the final game came out, where I'm sure it was probably some sort of like bikini clad lady in the end. I've not actually played the game, but it's usually the case. But yeah, it does look like there's some effort has gone into making him, which is quite funny. But I wonder what would have happened if they actually did release the game with him in there.
That's the thing, if it had ended up in there accidentally. That's quite a brave thing to do, isn't it? Because if the code was kind of buried away and someone figured it out, I imagine that would have been a lawsuit back then when they were at each other's throats. N64 and Dreamcast were like arch rivals, weren't they? So, very funny though, a little Nintendo ninja sneaking into a Sega game, and someone put it in the comments there. Very good. So if you want to check that out, I'll link that up in our show notes. Now, often when we talk to developers on this show who worked on video games decades ago, a lot of them have got fond memories. A lot of them kind of struggle a bit to remember, what they did 30, 40 years ago. It's very rare that we hear a story of a developer actually spotting a problem in a game they made 40 years ago and actually fixing it. But this is a game called Arctic Adventure, where the developer has done just that. He spotted a typo in the game, and he's gone back and actually corrected it all this time later.
Yeah, this is really mad. It's kind of crazy. This is legendary Harry McCracken, and he's basically created a text adventure for the TRS-80, but he created it as a teenager, so like 40 years ago. And it was inspired by Scott Adams, of course, who we've had on the podcast, who
legend.
did the adventure series. And it's really interesting because he'd actually lost this game. So he wrote it when he was 15 years old, and it was published in a book. So a lot of these games were just published as books, and then you'd write the code in and
type in listings.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And he'd lost it, and he'd kind of forgotten about the game as well. And he didn't have a copy of this book, and it was called the Captain 80 book. And basically someone managed to acquire it, but also told him that the game is got a bug in it, and that bug renders it unwinnable. So right. He was thinking, right, I'm going to try and get it working on a modern system. So he spent 5 or 6 hours typing it out on his iPad. And
that is commitment on an iPad.
Yeah. And then he had it restored in digital form, and he kind of found out that it was unplayable, and it consisted of a single missing zero in the character string. And a lot of these listings back in the days were kind of put in incorrectly, weren't they?
Oh God, most of them.
Yeah, and there always had to be a bit of a correction. So he ended up fixing this, but he also, as he fixed it, more bugs occurred. So he had to kind of fix those as well. And, he brings up a good point. He's like, should I have left it originally how it was? And or should I have kind of gone back to it? And he thought, you know what? I developed it. So 40 years later, why not go back to my own code and kind of fix it? And he's now actually released Arctic Adventure, and he's made it available online. So you don't even need the TRS-80 to play it. You can just play it within your browser, of course, like you can with many things these days. But just kind of being able to find a childhood game that you created and then repairing it 40 years later, I just think that's a really kind of wonderful story, and especially having it in a text form as well, which is just amazing, and then having to put it in and debug it yourself.
Yeah, he absolutely made the right choice, going back and fixing it. And the satisfaction you must have got from finally knowing that, after 40 years, it's a game that people can beat now. Because that was I'm not a programmer anymore at all. I did do a bit as I got probably like 9-10 years old into my early teens. Learned a bit of BASIC, did C on the Amiga for a bit as well. Forgotten everything I ever knew about programming now. But that was kind of my experience a lot of the time, was you'd spend most of your time trying to get mistakes that you made corrected, wouldn't you? That was a big experience of mine. Whether I was just crap at it, I don't know. But I remember spending most of my time trying to fix problems.
Well, he said he's also kind of added some things in for the modern generation to help them because, this is an old text adventure. So you've got a dog that follows you around and helps you win the game.
Yeah.
But also he's got a rudimentary slot machine simulator in there. And I heard him on another podcast, actually. He's on This Week in Tech, and he says, now slot machines and kind of gambling and playing in games is kind of a bit of a standard as well, actually. But back then it was really a new thing to have a little tiny casino hidden in the Arctic or something like that, We
were talking about that last week, like hidden games, retro games in modern games. It looks like it's been going on longer than we thought, actually. So since this is 1981. But yeah, there's not many developers that would care enough to go back and do that, I don't think. So it's very commendable that he did. So if you want to play it, I'll put that in our show notes as well.
If you check out arctic81.com, and there's a whole kind of story and background behind the game, and he's also done it in that TRS-80 font as well. So the site is just absolutely beautiful.
Now, before we chat to Stephen Leary from Terrible Fire, we love our Raspberry Pi projects. Now, this is a Raspberry Pi Pico handheld that emulates a Speccy and the Commodore 64. Now, this thing looks wild.
Yeah, so we've seen the Pico before, which is the Pico Raspberry Pi, which is a really tiny $4 microcontroller for the Raspberry Pi. And this enables you to kind of play games on it and smaller systems. It was low specs. Remember that one that I talked about a while ago, which was a credit card?
Yeah.
A full little credit card system with a QWERTY keyboard.
Yes.
Well, basically, this is the kind of similar style add-on, but it's been turned into a multi-retro emulator system. And what it contains is it contains a custom board that's powered by the Pico that has a games controller underneath it attached, but it also has a VGA output. So what you can do is you can put your controller on the top of it. You can have the option of having an LCD screen there, or you can have it switch styly going out, but of course not HDMI, VGA straight to your monitor. And being the kind of power that it is, this small one, you're not going to be able to do like Dreamcasts or anything on the Pico, but you can do a C64 and of course a ZX Spectrum as well.
You imagine it could probably do NES games as well.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, because it looks, I mean, I will link up the gallery. It's an article on Tom's Hardware, and you can scroll through the pictures. I mean, really, this is kind of, it looks proper homebrew, doesn't it? You know, you've got, it's not, you described it as a D-pad and a controller. Really, this is micro switches.
Yeah,
that you press with your finger.
There's no case on it. It's like, it's a raw kind of circuit board. But also, like, you know, I always thought that the Raspberry Pi Zero was the smallest Pi. And this Pico is just absolutely tiny, and it's so cheap. I'm really thinking of getting one myself. You know, it's got like 264K RAM on there, and it's just awesome.
You know, when the Pico came out, because I'm generally, well, as you guys know, I'm the guy that gets every new Raspberry Pi whenever they release them usually. And the Pico came out, and I looked at it, and it was like, you know, the way the Raspberry Pi Foundation were talking about it is that it's intended for embedded use and industrial use, and it was the first one that actually I didn't order on day one.
Yeah,
but now I'm seeing so many little projects coming out. 'Cause I mean, it's pretty much the size of like just a microchip, isn't it?
Yeah,
you know, really,
it's
very
tiny,
small.
And like I think, you know, Raspberry Pi always intends stuff to come out as kind of a controller, and then of course people turn it into a retro games machine. So it's cool that all these little add-ons are kind of getting there, and maybe we'll have a scene of these like little Pico devices and stuff, and all this takes is someone to print a 3D case on there, and you know you've got a wicked little portable like Spectrum or C64, and it also says it does the Atari 800 as well.
Yeah, I imagine all that generation it can probably do. Joe hasn't ever gotten the Raspberry Pi kind of train, have you? Have you ever been tempted to kind of build a little like emulation box in a joystick or something?
Yeah, I have been tempted to have like the Pandora's box, you know, the arcade kind of cabinets and stuff like that, but I just wouldn't know where to start. And you know, when you get them pre-built for you online, they're always really, really, really expensive. But I do really like the look of them, you know, and also like, you know, I've got a few friends who have just got the little Raspberry Pi boxes that you just plug into your TV and plug a SNES controller into a USB SNES controller, and then you've got a SNES there. Do you know what I mean? I do really like them, so I have been tempted with them, but I just don't know where to start. And then, like, whenever I feel like you guys talk about them, it's just over my head.
I'm sure Ravi's got a torrent or two he could write to an SD card.
Yeah, I'm sure he does.
But it is a mix. I'm not exaggerating when I say I've probably got about 12 of them. So different models around.
Well, I'll have one
I
off
can
you,
see 3
and then
now.
I'll have a torrent of Ravi.
Torrents, I'm well beyond torrents.
Sorry.
Torrents are retro to Ravi. So, I mean, it is amazing to see the uses. And you're right, Ravi. I mean, you know, often they come up, you read these articles, it's like, this is designed for industrial heating controllers. Yeah, next day you see it, someone's running Mega Drive games on it.
Yeah, I just think how smaller are these Raspberry Pis going to get?
Yeah.
Like, you know, we're going to have the postage stamp Pi, and that'll be the next one, and you'll be able to do a Game Boy on it or something.
But, you know, we were talking on our Patrons Hangout last weekend, you know, about the original Raspberry Pi. And I remember getting that, and, like, you were saying you used it as a Kodi box. And when I used my original Raspberry Pi, you know, you can even see the mouse pointer lagging sometimes on it, moving the mouse around the desk. Yeah. It was that slow. So in a decade, it's come on leaps and bounds.
Yeah, and these things can be really impressive, you know. I'm just amazed by this. And, like, I'm just even looking in it now, and it's got, like, a pin out for a joystick as well and stuff, so there's potential for it to really grow. Like the size of this, you could do like a Commodore 64 DTV kind of inside a joystick little device with it as well. Yeah, they're really cool.
Well, we have Monster Joysticks, who supported us a couple of weeks ago as well. I don't know if next time you're around, Joe, I've got to let you sit down with my Monster Joysticks.
Maybe that's the solution for Joe.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
You'll be buying one next day, trust me. So, long may the creativity on the retro scene on the Raspberry Pi, which is something, we had Eben Upton on the show last year. It's something that the Raspberry Pi Foundation are really behind the retro stuff. So, long may it continue. And I will link that story up and everything else we talk about in our show notes at theretrohour.com. Now, let's give a huge thank you to the lifeblood of this show. This is our wonderful patrons. And I really do mean that. They are the lifeblood of this show. We couldn't do it without them, could we?
Totally not. We love the patrons and they help us keep independent, and they also help us with our war against Gardener's World, our main rival podcast in the charts. But, they do help us keep independent, and this show is basically, we haven't got anyone big behind us. It's just three of us guys enjoying it, and our patrons have formed a great community around it, and it keeps it fun as well. It means it's not just like work. And the great thing about it is we have loads of meetups and stuff as well. So we've done our monthly patron meetup, which is basically a huge kind of Brady Bunch style chat where we're all on camera and we're all chatting to each other about different systems, how we
Marcia.
Yeah, how we can help each other out. We all say good night at the end, and it's like really good fun. But also we have the Retro Hour After Hours, which is just an awesome little podcast where we're talking about our memories of, older systems. I think we're going to do the Dreamcast next, and we're talking about the retro years as well. So, our memories, the naughty stuff that I got up to, stuff that Joe was fighting over in the playground, all the new technology launches Dan was waiting for. It's really good fun. And, by supporting us, you get a load of bonus features, but you also help this show kind of chug along.
Yeah, and you also get the main podcast ad-free and early most weeks as well. But you're right. I mean, it's just, the fact is, without our patrons, we'd have to pay to do this show, which, we couldn't afford to do. So really, it's thanks to you guys that we can put it out every single Friday. We can devote time to getting these incredible guests on. Because we were thinking today, I mean, I was saying to you guys, like, I dedicate most of Thursdays to editing, like, the following show. But I probably spend around, I'd say, 10 hours a week just editing this show. That's without doing the research and without, finding all the news stories. So there is a lot of work behind the scenes that goes on, which is nice that we can just focus on that, and our patrons will do the other stuff that pays for the show and just keeps it going.
Yeah,
so
writing and researching questions, that's a massive task when you have lots of guests, and then arranging it and working out international time zones and everything. So we do a lot of stuff, and this just really helps us do that and keep the show chugging along.
Yeah, and of course, for backers on Patreon, you will get a mention in the most prestigious high score table in the world of retro gaming, the Retro Hour Hall of Fame. And a big thank you this week to Jeff Owen from the Beyond Farpoint podcast,
Reese Clapworthy,
Clyde Radcliffe,
MCSH,
and Lucas Porhashimi,
who all backed us on Patreon. We massively appreciate your support. And if you'd like to do the same, you'll find it on our website right now on the front page of theretrohour.com. Thing is, Joe, you and I both know that if Gardener's World or Gardener's Question Time podcast approached Ravi to go on, he'd be off in a heartbeat.
You guys just need to let it give me a gardening section, and then we'll be good.
We'll be there. We'll be good.
Ravi's weekly gardening tips, and we'll be there.
Gardening with Ravi. So, thanks very much for your support and for getting the show in the podcast up there with Gardener's Question Time each week. Right then, next, we're going to be talking all about the incredible Terrible Fire project with our special guest, Stephen Leary, next on the Retro Hour podcast. You're listening to the Retro Hour podcast, and it is time for the main event when we welcome on this week's very special guest. And today, it is an honour to be joined by our guest who's helped Ravi and I, get more out of our Amigas recently. I must admit, I wouldn't play my CD32 anywhere near as much as I do now without our guest's incredible products this week. Let's welcome on Stephen Leary from the Terrible Fire project. Hey, Stephen, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing good. How are you guys?
Very good, thank you. Now, before we get into all that, it's always nice to kind of just find out where your journey began. I mean, kind of going back to when you first got into computers. What was your first machine, and what got you into it initially then when you were young?
My first machine was a rubber-keyed ZX Spectrum I got for Christmas. I can't, it was 7 or 8. I think it must have been 8. And that was just, the tape loading experience. It was 48K, so there was always a bunch of games that would come on the magazines that you couldn't play because they were, even by that time, 128 games were out, I think. So I was always lusting after the next machine, but could never get one. And I think eventually I managed to wangle my way up to an Amiga 600.
You weren't building accelerators for the Spectrum already, were you, at that age?
No, I wasn't. I wasn't. I was probably building soapbox racers. I don't know if there's a translation for Americans or for our international audience, but I think that's building soapbox racers and crashing them basically, and having terrible accidents.
Well, what was your Amiga setup like back in the day then? You said you had a 600, and were you a bit of a power user, or did you just use it for general gaming, or did you get into the applications and stuff like that?
So it's funny you mentioned that because I was encouraged to get an Amiga 600 by somebody who was working as a games developer at the time, a lad called Kev Brady. And he had sort of coached me into sort of doing a bit of machine code programming on the Spectrum, and he kind of got me into sort of just the basics of getting sprites moving around and stuff like that on the Spectrum, but it was really limited, as you can imagine. And he kind of sent me a couple of discs with, I think, DevPack 2 on it and some sample code and stuff like that. So I would have had an Amiga 600. I got the Epic pack, so it had the hard disk. It had a 20 meg hard disk, which is crazy to think of these days, but
it seemed a lot of the time though, didn't it?
It did. Well, I think even then I was shuffling stuff back and forward and having to uninstall and install games. But Kev got me into doing 68,000 machine coding, and I pretty much did that right from the get-go, from having the machine, doing some coding and stuff like that. So yeah, it would have been the machine would probably have been a 2 meg A600 with a 20 meg hard disk, and kitted out for doing game dev and stuff like that.
And were you checking out the demo scene and kind of looking at the PD stuff as well out there, and trying to work out who was actually using assembler and stuff, and who was using other languages?
A little bit of that, but mostly that was. We didn't have the internet back then. We just simply didn't have it. We had our magazines were our internet. That was our only source of information. And then I would occasionally get sent something through by Kevin. He would say, "Let's check this out," or "Look at that," and "Look at this." And and I suppose I grew up in the Outer Hebrides. It was very limited access to. We had magazines, but there wasn't really that many computer stores, and they didn't last very long. The ones that we had, so yeah, I don't think I was really looking at what was in assembly and what wasn't. I know people at school were doing Amos stuff. A lot of the guys I was at school with were doing Amos, and I sort of stood out as a weirdo because I was doing assembler.
Would you think that kind of isolation helped you get into creating stuff just out of necessity, or just giving you something to do?
Well, a lot of it was giving us something to do, because in the winters there wasn't really a whole lot you could. We had like 70, 80, 90 mile an hour gales a lot of the time, and you were coding away, and then you get a power cut, and that would be that. So at least with the Amiga, you could get back up and running quite quickly. With the Spectrum, it was back to the tape and reloading everything back from scratch, wasn't it?
Well, how did you get into electronics?
So, ironically, I wanted to go to so it was come 1996, and I was going to go to university, and I had a couple of choices. I could have gone and done computing science, or I could have gone and done. I was taking my pick of I was having a look at what I was going to do, and I think my dad had been an electrician, and they didn't really think this computing thing was going to go anywhere, and that I would be better off getting a job and trying to work out, going to university learning electronics, because ironically I could learn to repair stuff. And we all know how things went after that, become a completely disposable society. But that's what I did at university. I did a 4-year bachelor's degree in electronic and electrical engineering, and then I topped that off with a 7-year PhD program from the same department.
And did that give you huge equipment to labs and huge access to labs and stuff like that? Yeah,
and to be honest though, after a while, the sort of stuff I'm doing now, I was teaching to kids. I was teaching, while I was doing my PhD, I was teaching that to simple electronics, analog electronics, digital electronics and all that sort of stuff. I was teaching that to the first years and second years as they came through.
Well, a PhD is pretty much a specialization in a subject. So what was the kind of area that you decided to specialize in?
So I kind of, it's quite an interesting thing. And it's one of the things that I find quite funny when people talk about the things that I've achieved, because I would say my greatest achievement is getting my PhD, because I did my PhD in a sort of ground unified theory type area, specializing with some guys, a guy called Martin van der Mark, who passed away at the beginning of 2020, and a guy called John Williamson, who's very much alive, is still here in Glasgow. And the two of them and the three of us have written papers together. We've held, hosted conferences. I have some of the biggest body of work of that stuff published in my name. It was an incredible honor to work with those guys. I mean, Martin was the smartest guy I've ever met in my entire life by like 6 or 7 country miles. It was just such a privilege and an honor to be able to work with them. So yeah, it was relativistic electromagnetism, formulated in new algebras, but that kind of was like the basis of a theory that these guys were putting together.
Well, that sounds hugely above our heads, but yeah, fantastic.
So Amiga accelerators are a little bit easier.
Well, obviously, these Amiga accelerators that we'll get into a bit further. I mean, kind of, what were your earliest projects that you made for like your home computers? Then was the stuff that you were making just for yourself initially?
I did my PhD, and that really basically consumed every waking moment until 2007. And before that, I was doing like little add-ons, joysticky type stuff, registersy things for Spectrums and BBC Micros. And then I think I kind of got my mojo back a bit after, because with my PhD I was working till about 10, 11 o'clock, sometimes 4 o'clock in the morning. And then when that stopped, I just stopped for a year. I just didn't do anything in my spare time at all. And after that, I think my first sort of major project was I worked on the core that's now part of Mister and Mist for the Archimedes. So I produced the FPGA core, a bit like sort of Mini Mig, but for the Mist.
And the Mist was like the precursor to the Mister, wasn't it?
That's good. I actually have one of the I think it's probably one of like the first 4 or 5 prototypes, hand-built ones by Till Harbin. Or I'm not sure actually how you say his name. I'm probably mangling it, but that's how I pronounce it. Till Harbin. And the Mist, the original Mist, I think when he came up with this, see if I can remember, the raison d'etre for it was that the Mini Mig had been out there and there'd been these boards, but they worked fine and they were brilliant, but you just couldn't buy them. So Teal devised this board, this sort of framework where you could do FPGA development work on it. He had an ARM processor in there that handled the I/O in a standard way that all the cores could share. I think the reason I actually got into it was I was actually working on doing an Atari ST FPGA core, and so was he. And we kind of looked at it and I went, well, you're much further ahead with the development of all this. You have all my code and I'll go and do the Archimedes. And that's kind of how we got going. And I think there's some tiny little bits of my original Atari ST code in the Mist, in the original Atari ST core. I think there's some tiny little bits left to do with the MFP timers, because I just happened to have written it in a particularly nice way that was a bit more elegant than the way Teal had written it. So the Archimedes stuff then just took off, and I spent, I think, probably 2012 to 2014 working on that, and kind of had my fill of FPGA development work at the end of that, and it's been ported over by other people onto Mister now.
Yeah, that's cool, because all that kind of stuff like Mini Mig and everything laid the foundation for the Mister, and now we've got a huge multi-system kind of device, which is just really good. So interesting to hear you worked on that. Well, tell us about the Terrible Fire project and what it is and why was it needed? The
Terrible Fire project. Well, I'll tell you what started it is I wanted to do some PCB stuff. I wanted to do physical boards because I spend all my day at a desk writing code, and I'd come through the Archimedes project and thought, hey, I'm actually spending 6, 7 hours, 8 hours a day at work coding for work, and then I come home and I spend 6, 7 hours coding for fun. And it's a lot of time sitting at the screen just writing code, and I just wanted to do something slightly different and do some software development. Get away from the software development and get more into although it's hardware development, it's still typing stuff into a text editor, basically. So I thought, let's just do some PCB designs. And I had looked around, and I think there was a couple of things that had prompted me. So that was the first thing. I wanted to get into PCB design. The second thing was I, at the time, couldn't find a cheap-ish A500 RAM board or accelerator card or anything. And there was nothing I could just. There was a couple of them on eBay, but they were very expensive. They were even back then, they were going for £200-300. So I thought, well, I could maybe do this. And I bought a Blizzard 060 card and thought and it was something like £800. And I just thought, there's got to be a way. There must be a way we can get to building one of these for less than these cards are going nowadays. Now, I just tried knocking up something quite simple in an 020 accelerator and see if I can get it working. And, I think I kind of made a pledge to myself back then that if I had a design in Eagle or whatever, a PCB design, I wouldn't sit looking at it forever. I would sit checking it forever. I would send it off, get it built, and start working out what was wrong with it, and then do another one, and then do another one, and do another one. And so that's kind of where it started. I think that was 2016, the end of August 2016. I fired off my first Terrible Fireboard to the board house and came back a couple of weeks later.
Well, how are your products sold and made? Do you do them yourself? Have you got other people? And what's kind of the model there?
So it's kind of evolved over time, but I think initially what I thought I would do is I would just make everything open source. And I found that I was uncomfortable with people changing my work. There was things that were legitimately broken, and I accepted those things as changes, but there was also things where people were just changing it for style or for what they perceived as style without having actually tested it. And I maybe this could be a failing in me, but I found that quite irritating. So initially it was, here's a link, you can buy the PCBs on Dirty PCBs. I think it was Dirty PCBs to start with. And then I switched to a model where I would buy a batch and then I would just sell the batch. Like say the board was £3, I'd sell it for £5 on eBay or something like that, or whatever it was. I would get enough of a profit to buy to recycle to pay for the next batch of boards for me, so that I could. And I basically found myself in a position where I could just keep it was the development costs of the boards themselves were paying for themselves, and that was fantastic. That got me through the first 3 or 4 boards. Nowadays, it's evolved again and again and again, and nowadays. The latest board, the TF1230, I have never ordered it at all. I have never had one delivered to me from the board house. This morning, I got one from one of the forum users, Goose. He sent me one I said, I haven't got any spare. I haven't got any blanks. So I'm not even building them myself anymore. Although I could do them. They're just going to guys like John Hurtle, Chucky, or they're going to Mark Brown Super Duper, or they'll go to Alan Marks in Canada, and probably Alan won't send me something because it doesn't make sense to send something transatlantic, but they'll send me the prototype built, and that keeps me free from the building part of things to just keep doing the development work on the firmwares and things.
Well, we need to ask the question, why Terrible Fire? It's not the most positive name for a kind of board.
If I had,
and these are made very well. They're not going to burn your house down. Just to get it.
It stems back from I worked with my best man on a few projects in the noughties. I worked on a few projects with him, and we had a few times things went on fire. And he's also one of the guys who does pyrotechnics. He does like properly licensed display fireworks and stuff. So he has on occasion, he has come back from a night doing displays and added things to the Shrine of Terrible Fire. And we had a place where we had all the things that had burned or blown up, and we just put them in a pile, and it was the Shrine to Terrible Fire. And that was actually where the name came from.
Well, famously, Steve Wozniak's first Mac set on fire, didn't it, on one of his homemade computers? So it's in tradition there.
Yeah, but so we just, I mean, he I'd say I'm ready to test the new prototype, or I'm ready to test something, and he goes, "It'll be a terrible fire," or something like that. So, and I was just, and I think I was out running one day, and I was thinking for a name for the YouTube channel that I had back in the day, and I just thought, "Terrible Fire, why not?"
It's memorable as well. I mean, people remember it, so yeah, definitely works to your advantage, I think.
I was intending I actually was intending to have more fire on the on the show, but it didn't ever pan out.
What kind of equipment and setup have you got at home to do all this?
Oh my God, I have taken over residence in what was formerly a recording studio now. So this was it was actually a radio station. I won't say the name of the radio station, but I have managed. I've kitted the place out, and the more I found, the more stations I can set up, the more efficient I can work. So if I can have one station set up for the CD32, one station set up for the Amiga 500, one station set up. I have a permanent station set up at the moment for the 1200. In fact, two at the moment for the 1200. But if I can get these multiple stations, and every one of those stations has a logic analyzer, and this usually with a built-in oscilloscope, some kind of display device for displaying the output of the Amiga or capturing it onto a computer, either a laptop or a desktop computer for doing the development work there at that station. Probably a bench power supply as well. That's my bare minimum setup for each one of them. It's usually about 100 channel logic analyzers. Most of them are networked, so I can sit up here in my office and remotely control my lab, basically.
Because I remember on the YouTube videos, you were stuffed into a room and you had like all of the kind of stuff in one small space. So it's good to hear that you've got all these like multiple stations now. Does it make it a lot more efficient?
It will once it's all set up. But I've taken to buying other projects, and I've filled a lot of the space. I shouldn't have done that, but I haven't properly unpacked from the move yet, and I think it's going to take years to unpack from that move.
Well, do you think stuff like printable PCBs and the kind of democratization of like hardware has made it a lot easier to kind of start up as a one-man show and like make it a lot more fun?
I don't even know if I ever thought about it being a one-man show, but it certainly has made the kind of stuff that I'm doing. It's a lot easier. The price drop of this stuff. If it was costing £1,000 to spin a board, I probably wouldn't be doing this, and it probably wouldn't be. We'd have to be doing volumes right from the get-go, which we don't have to do now. We can just kind of buy in batches of 20 or something like that, and batches of 50 if we're feeling really, really confident in the board. So, but I do think it's enabled the hobbyist to get his work out to the masses, I suppose is a good way of putting it, yeah.
Which has kind of definitely spur on the Amiga market as well. There's so many adapters and devices out there at the moment now, compared to like you said when you started, and everybody was buying older devices and stuff off eBay and paying high prices.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is, these things were failing. They had patched tracks on them. At least now, even if we aren't able to, I mean, even for just general Amigas, some of the work that guys like John Hurtle have done, and there's other guys that have done similar things. I don't want to just single him out. I just can't remember off the top of my head who has, but they've been doing things like the Amiga, where they've got the original chipsets have come off Amigas, where the boards have got faults on them, but the chips are perfectly fine, and it's giving those chips a chance to live again in a new board.
Well, we have like listeners from all over the world, who are into all different platforms and, all different kind of expertise levels. I mean, at its most basic, there might be people listening and thinking, it sounds cool upgrading, an Amiga, for example, but kind of at its base, having one of your cards in a system like the Amiga, what does it bring extra to the machine and what are people using them for?
Well, I've never really understood. Let me put it this way. I would always say to people, you're going to get better performance out of WinUAE or an emulator, right? So if what you want is a really, really fast machine, start with the emulator, don't just dive straight in. But what my card does is, or my cards do generally is, I've got sort of three basic things I try and do with them. One is try and make it fit in as naturally as possible so that you get the speed increase without having to do as much configuration or having to set stuff up or poke things or have scripts or things, so that your average guy in the street can plug it in and see a difference straight away. So that's sort of number one. I want it to just be, you plug it in and assuming that it works and all the connections, sometimes you have to clean the connections and stuff like that. But you plug it in and you get a faster machine straight away. Sometimes there's instructions, but sometimes, most of the time, if I can get away with it, just try and make it as plug and play as possible. And the other thing is just trying to make it as cheap as possible, because that's the key thing. If you want to get your stuff out to as large an appeal as possible, then what you need to do is make it as cheap as possible. But you want to be, I do want to be the lowest common denominator. I want the Terrible Fire stuff to be, the bottom of the range. I want them to be the thing that everybody has because they're so affordable. And I also wanted them to be able to be produced. So the third thing was I wanted them to be producible globally. So the guys that we have working on this can produce them in any country. Well, I think we're producing them on 3 continents anyway, and we're selling them on 4. I say we're selling them. I'm not actually selling anything at all, personally. I don't actually sell anything at all. But yeah, sorry if I maybe didn't answer your question, but...
No, that makes total sense. And I think, from a personal perspective, and as I mentioned at the start, obviously I've got one of your Terrible Fire 330 cards in my CD32, and that transformed that machine for me because, that was the Amiga console that came out, in the early 90s. I've had one since then, but really it got to a stage where I was burning a few of the CD compilations that fans had made to get a few different games on there. But having your card in there, it turns it into really, like a souped up Amiga 1200. And I put all my games on a launcher and everything. So I love the fact that you also target these kind of more niche platforms like the CD32. And I've seen some people putting the cards in like CD TVs and things like that as well. So do you kind of think it's important to expand even those systems that, maybe weren't as popular as stuff like the Amiga 500?
I think those are the ones that I really do want to push, because the accelerator cards that are for those, that are kicking around for those nowadays, if you can find one, are extortionately expensive. Look at how much the SX, was it the SX 32?
I think 32, yeah. That was before the Kipper 2K.
So the initial rise of the Kipper 2K riser, and then you got the SX boards were, I think in one of your videos, Dan, you said that the TF330 was comparable to the sort of top of the line, what you could have got for the CD32 back in the day. Now, people will argue, well, there's no joystick port, there's no parallel port, no serial port, no floppy port. And my argument to that is, well, I can't see that as many people would want that as would want what's been presented. So it's basically the bare bones, keep it simple. Where projects, and I don't just mean Amiga hardware projects, I mean projects in general, everywhere, anywhere you go, any discipline, any, software engineering projects, mechanical engineering products, civil engineering products, they all fail because they try to do too much, they're too complicated, and they try to overreach. The ones that do fail. The ones that succeed are the ones that keep it simple. And that's what I've always tried to do, is just keep it as simple, keep the goals achievable, keep the promises to a minimum, I suppose, so nobody's disappointed.
And I agree as well, because it's got everything you need on there to make that, system I mentioned then. You've got the compact flash slot, I've got an SD card adapter in there. It's got the RAM and the 030 chip on there to play some of the more high-end games. And, no one's printing out from their Amiga these days. That's kind of the stuff that you need, to get that great little gaming platform in the CD32, I think.
Yeah, the CD32 is actually my favorite Amiga, hands down. I have 6 of them. I have the FMV module, and my my desire for things like I've designed a riser with one of the lads here in Edinburgh. I'm building these things, some of these things, because I want them. It's I wanted the 060 in the CD32. I think Ravi's got one of those. He's got one of the prototypes, and I'm going to come back and visit that and finish it now that we've really done something. We've really got the 1200 nailed. But the 1200 is the one that everybody wanted. That was the thing that the masses wanted. But, electrically, there's not that much difference between a CD32 and a 1200. And, it was a great machine to prototype all the stuff on and then transfer that over to the 1200 and then send it out.
I find it interesting you mentioned the FMV module there, because that was an expansion that Commodore released for the CD32 back in the day that let you, I think there was only like a little handful of games that had full motion video
about 2 or
intros.
3 games.
It wasn't many. But I always wanted one, and like you could watch video CDs on it. I mean, is that something you could put on like a future revision of the Terrible Fire just for fun?
It's something I've looked at. It's something that I might try and do in some form or another, but it is quite far down my list at the moment. And I'm trying to think what I always try to think, what Amiga software do you want to run that you wouldn't be able to do on another platform? So as much as I don't have anything against people using like things like Lightwave or productivity stuff on an Amiga, I'm not against it. I'm not anti it, but I don't think that that's the market that I'm catering for. I'm looking for the guys that are wanting to play NEMAC 4 at flat out on their Amiga, things that you can't get on another platform. That's my, and that's why, an 060 on a 1200 and or CD32, that's what I'm targeting. Quake. Well, Quake's not really an Amiga game. It's not. I mean, for me, it's a benchmarking tool, but it's not something that I think I would ever seriously sit down and play on an Amiga.
Yeah, Alien Breed 3D they're running on an 060.
Yeah,
that'd be nice.
Yeah, exactly. It's just really just trying to look at the software that's only available on Amiga or on Amiga like platform that there was no PC version for example.
Well, you hang around on Exo's forum as well. How helpful has that place been for like hardware chat, and is it a good kind of knowledge base?
It's a fantastic forum. It was set up by Chris Swanson, and I think between the two of us, we've really made it into quite a friendly place. The sort of the don't know how to put it. The sort of arguments that you would find on other forums you don't get on that forum. You might get an argument about whether a capacitor is going to blow up or something or like that, but not which system was better, an Atari ST or an Amiga. Those kind of arguments just never happen. It's
very techy, isn't it?
It is, and it's meant to be there for hardware guys or for people with hardware issues, or if you've got an Atari Falcon and it's blown up and you need it fixed, that's where I would go.
Well, what's the community support like these days? Because I know there was a time last year when I was really sad to see that, the project was put on hold, and it seemed like there's some stressful times around then. Are things like mostly positive now then? Are those kind of problems ironed out? Because I think I speak for everyone when I say I was really pleased to see that you picked it up and decided to continue with the project.
So, I mean, so I got to give some shout outs to people at this point because it would be unfair not to. I would say, number one, John Hurtle. I might have just walked away from everything because I think, this is a hobby. So when people start hassling me, I just think, why I don't want to do this, so I've got to go do something else. I've got a son, I've got other interests. I'm a pilot as well. So I put some time into that. But big shout out to John Hurtle for that Chucky gang. And probably one of the lads I really wanted to give a shout out to, and I was talking to him about this before I came on the show, and he said, dude, don't mention me because it's about you. But Banjo Guy Ollie has really sort of given me a pat on the back, told myself, put your big boy pants on and get back out there, and kind of we've had group therapy sessions about being in the public eye. So yeah, you can really thank Ollie and John Hurtle and the guys from the Scottish Amiga group as well. They've been pretty chilled.
I've got to say, like Banjo Guy Ollie, Man, some of his stuff is absolutely amazing. If you're into kind of retro tunes and stuff, definitely check him out. He's a very talented musician.
Yeah, so I said to him, well, I like to shout out people who restore my insanity. So, and he thought it was a great quote. So yeah, I'm giving him the shout out.
Well, one project we've heard about is the Buffy, and that's kind of making the Amiga reach absolutely insane speeds. And I hear you're doing a bit of work with them, or you're helping kind of support that. Yeah,
so I mean, they've been very friendly, and basically I have built a card that will take a plain 68,000 and make it work in a 1200. Just so the Buffy can fit into a 1200, and have advised on my experiences with the 68,000 processors. Really, that's and beyond that, I haven't really done anything except saying I think that I don't think that's going to work. Try it, or please verify that before you do a run of 10,000 orders or whatever. So just steering and being I don't know what you would, a resource, like a terminal where you can ask questions, I suppose.
And that's nice working collaboratively. And that project's pretty insane. Like, if our listeners don't know, I'm sure you do if you're listening, but their goal is to have like 3.2 gigahertz and around 1,000 MIPS, which is just like insanely fast. For
and a gigabyte of RAM.
Yeah, for any Amiga, really. Insanely fast, yeah. Just amazing.
No, and it will be an amazing project. I think there's some kinks and things that need to get ironed out, but those are getting done. A little bit of progress is getting done every day.
Well, would you ever go? I know you mentioned before that your aim is to kind of get these top end classic Amigas, but I know there are kind of other accelerators out there with stuff like PowerPC chips on there and even ARM co-processors, that kind of thing. Would you ever go beyond 68K and do something like that?
On the Amiga, I don't necessarily see the point, and I'll explain and qualify my remarks, because I don't see that there's a whole lot of PPC software. I heard it expressed recently quite well. It was by the lady that's doing the Buffy project, the lead on the Buffy project, and she'd said that Amiga is dead in the sense that Latin is dead, in the sense that since the fall of the Roman Empire, there's been no evolution of Latin, and there's really not been very much acceptance of a standard way of doing all this PowerPC or ARM stuff on an Amiga. I don't know if anybody will ever, if the community will ever agree on something like that. And I would want to be looking at what value am I going to give somebody with what I'm delivering, and if I'm putting a 300 quid PowerPC on a card and they can run Quake. Well, they can run Quake on their PC. So, yeah. I don't know. I mean, I haven't, and it's not a no. It's just, I don't at the moment see the value of it, but I haven't thought about it too hard because I've got enough projects.
Well, those cards go for, I see them on eBay for like £2,000 and I'm like, who is buying those?
Yeah. I mean, for me personally, I have a PowerPC Amiga type computer, and it's a Mac Mini, G4 Mac Mini with Morphos on it, and it's less than 100 quid. So at that kind of value, I don't see what you would get from plugging that into a 1200. But I mean, that's just my my opinion.
Well, there's loads of like little adapters and mods out there. What are the kind of favourite ones that you've seen for the Amiga? Like something that's kind of stood out to you, like, oh wow, that's a neat solution.
I really like the A314. I thought that was a really clever idea. Do you know what I mean by the A314? It was like the Raspberry Pi plugged into the expansion slot of an A500.
Yeah, I saw that. So that acted like a co-processor where it would do stuff like video interface, but using the Raspberry Pi power, stream kind of MP3 audio. And instead of kind of taking over the CPU, it was like a complement to the Amiga, wasn't it?
You could kind of SSH from the Amiga to, or I don't know if it was SSH or not, but you had basically a terminal interface. I think it might have been serial port between the Amiga and the and the A314. And I just thought that was, when I saw that, I thought, wow, that's brilliant. I wish I'd thought of that.
Yeah, I think it had a VM on there as well, so you could basically like access your Amiga away from home using the Raspberry Pi to actually access it remotely.
Yeah.
Like VNC
Like
style,
VNC.
yeah,
Oh, wow.
which is just amazing, really. And it didn't take any of the any of the resources from Workbench really to do that.
Yeah, I thought that was a fantastic little solution, and it was really trying to solve a problem, or just trying to do one thing really, really well. And that's one thing, things I really like is when somebody does something like that, just has an idea and does it really, really well.
Well, one thing that was really popular back in the day that actually I'm very pleased to see has had a resurgence in recent years, and I know some of them have been going a long time, is user groups. And I know you're part of the Scottish Amiga group. How do you guys kind of help each other out then? And I guess they give you a lot of support.
I mean, it's obviously been very different times the last 2 years. I mean, there's a church hall in Crossmaloof just down the road here. We normally, before COVID, would meet up there and have a sort of get together where everybody would bring their machines and show and tell. And I would always bring 2 or 3 machines, set them up, and let people sit down and play on them and just chat, basically. And it's usually set up by Rob Cranley. From I think he's Daedalus on the forums, and he's one of the guys on the Amiga Ireland podcast, part of the Amiga Ireland group. So he lives like about a mile from me. So he's been very, very good at organizing these meetups, and I think that's a really good way to go, because you get to see other people's setups, and I would bring stuff along that I'd been working on and give stuff away for free or whatever if I had it hanging around. And I've also had people bring terrible fire cards that have been soldered really badly and said, could I fix it? And I was like, I'll have a look, but not sure if I can just instantly see what's wrong with it,
Reatari is a kind of project that's actually starting to use the TF356. So what's kind of happening there, and how's Terrible Fire helping out the Atari community?
So this is Exos. This is the guy who runs the Exos forum, Chris Swanson. I think this was, you could probably just get him on and have him talk about it, but I'll give you the summary. I think basically he's been fixing people's Atari STs worldwide for 10 years, maybe more. And there's a standard set of fixes that everybody needs. And sometimes the motherboards are past it. They've got damage on them and blah, blah, blah. So sort of same reason for having the Amiga, but there's a whole bunch of fixes that people have discovered they need over the years, that patches for things like the floppy drive, and I pull up resistors on things and stuff like that. So Chris has just basically done a design for, it's not a Atari, it's not like the Amiga where the tracks were traced. This was done from scratch, and all of the, from the schematics that Atari published, done from scratch. It has 4 68,000 slots in it, so peripherals will just sit in the 68K slots. I think there's also a fifth one that's 3.3 volts. It's called the H5. That's Atari H5. And the Terrible Fire stuff, for me, the Terrible Fire with fast RAM in an Atari an STFM, that form factor, is pretty nice. And it's it's actually faster than an Atari Falcon. It just doesn't have the graphics modes of an Atari Falcon.
So I know there's been that kind of traditional rivalry, and I'm kind of pleased to see that, as a community, people have kind of got past that, and, the Amiga community helps out the ST community, because I think, all working together, it makes amazing stuff like this happen. Did you kind of feel like the ST community missed out quite a bit on these hardware developments? Because it felt like, for a while, a lot of them have been more like Commodore and Amiga focused.
There's some fundamental issues with doing hardware upgrades on those Ataris. There are some advantages that the Amiga has over the Atari, and it's purely that some of these things the chips are socketed on the Amiga when they're not on the Atari, and that just becomes a huge barrier to somebody pulling a chip out and plugging in an accelerator. Unfortunately, if you want to put a TF536 in a standard Atari, well, first of all, there's no such thing as in a standard Atari. Almost every motherboard has a different layout, and the 68K chip can be in a completely different place on the board on most of them. And then even if you have one of the standard ones where the TF536 is going to fit, you still need to desolder the 68K out before you can put a socket in and then plug in a new accelerator. Compare that experience to throwing in something into any kind of accelerator into an Amiga 500, and it's massively different. And the Amiga 500 is the side expansion as well, which you can put a CPU on. So I think that's been the reason that there hasn't been as many upgrades available for the Atari ST, and I think that's pretty much the only reason, to be honest.
Well, one thing I've seen recently is that you're working on an MSX clone, and this is pretty awesome. We've done one episode on the MSX, and it's such an amazing kind of system. What's going on there?
So that's Banjo Guy Ollie's fault. I mean, I'm just going to blame him because he's like, look at this system, isn't it cool? And I had to look at the system, and I have to admit, I was a bit skeptical to start with, but then when I saw things like games like Nightmare and King's Valley and all these games, oh my goodness, they're so hard and they're so difficult, and yet they're so addictive and brilliant and amazing, and you can keep playing them. And then I just looked at the prices of MSXs and went, oh my goodness, what on earth is going on there? So when you look at that sort of thing and you think, well, what could I do? And I thought, well, you can make a whole system on a chip thing again, but it's been done. So I thought, well, why don't I like making boards. Why don't I just try making an MSX? I'll just spend a day or two on it and I'll put it together, and then whatever I've got in a couple of days, I'll fire off to the board house. And it came back and it works. I mean, there's a lot of mistakes in it in the original, in the initial one, and I'm about to send off my second run on it, and hopefully we should be able to get an MSX for hopefully not too much money. It uses all the original chips, but it's like there's using an original Z80 and an original VDP processor and an original YM sound chip, but everything else is modern tech and surface mount, reliable, pre-assembled by the board house. So hopefully have one of them out. Oh, and I've ditched the tape interface because who needs a tape interface? USB keyboard. And I think other than that, it's a standard MSX. So it's a cartridge, 2 joysticks, and a USB keyboard if you want to use it for a keyboard. But otherwise, you can just use the sticks.
And it's interesting because famously, we talked on the podcast, there was a shipment of MSXs that were meant to come over to the UK, and then it got stopped, and kind of the Dutch guys got it, and it got really popular over there. So do you think, that some UK people will really like this machine and get into it?
Yeah, I do. I think the UK missed out on the MSX, but I do also think it probably would have been very difficult to compete with the machines that were around at the time. Price-wise, it was so much more expensive than things like the Spectrum, but then again, it was so much better than the Spectrum. So maybe, who knows? But I do also think that, that philosophy that Clive Sinclair, and really sad to hear that he passed away in the last week, that, I do believe in that philosophy of just trying to democratize these things so that they're available to anyone who wants them, and to try and keep them available. And that's the secret to getting this stuff out. And I think that's what I've always done. As I said, I've always just tried to get this stuff out to people. And I think having the MSX clone would be fantastic for people to have a look at. And there's lots of different ways you can get into the MSX. I mean, sure, you guys have covered it. Open MSX emulator, and there's even some interesting MSXs that are for JAMA board MSXs that take cartridges for arcade machines coming out. So, which I think is absolutely fantastic.
Well, you mentioned arcades there, and I know recently you've been doing some arcade machine projects. What have you been doing there?
This is another Banjo Guy Ollie's a bad influence. So I kind of got in July I bought a Street Fighter 2 arcade machine, and then I bought a couple of weeks later, I bought a multicade for my kid because it was Mario art on it and he wanted it. And then a week later, I found a Space Invaders for my wife. That's still not got here, but it's on its way. And 3 weeks ago, I got a Chase HQ. And last week, I bought an Operation Wolf, and it's not got here yet. So,
been doing some shopping.
it's yeah. I mean, I've got quite a big house now, but I think I'm running out of space for arcade machine. Yeah.
What projects have you been working on then? You've been doing some stuff that you can drop into these machines.
And just trying to like maintain them as well, I guess.
Yeah, so it was kind of a brutal intro into it with the Chase HQ machine. Chase HQ machines they're just absolutely gorgeous. I mean, they're spectacular. If you haven't seen them, go look up on YouTube and look up the videos of them going. When you catch up with the bad guy, it's a racing game where you have to catch the bad guy, and if you guys don't know it, but probably all do. But
oh yeah,
the lights on the arcade machine, there's like siren lights that start to flash, and it's just that's what it's the shiny lights that sold it to me. So yeah, but then it was a brutal intro to that because the board didn't work. There was issues with the board. I got myself a spare for reference. That one had other issues, totally separate ones. I fixed some of them. I've realized what bits of them are easily destroyed. I've whipped together a reproduction chip for that bit that's easily destroyed. I'm in the process of working on that. So I have another development station set up right by one of the arcade machines for doing development work on that. That'd be quite a cool project when it's done, because that's the bit that handles most of the steering input controls. So if that's reproduced, then it could actually be put on a carrier board with maybe a Raspberry Pi and doing all of the game, whereas the inputs are then handled by this reproduction chip, maybe. So there's just some ideas of where I could go with some of this stuff for the future.
That's pretty cool, like basically a drop-in replacement for a chip that's not kind of produced anymore.
It's a pretty simple chip. It's an I/O. It's something that takes signals and puts them on a bus. So it's a good one to start with, I think.
This is my ultimate question now then. I know it's a lot more complex than a simple arcade chip, but could you ever do a replacement for those expensive 060s that are on the Amiga and classic 68K machines that you could just drop in?
Probably not. Not easily. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I imagine that was probably far too complex, but it's always my dream.
I mean, what I would suggest is that this is probably something where I see the real value in something like Buffy, because effectively what Buffy is a software-defined processor. So if we could get something like Buffy in the form factor of an 060 with a 32-bit data bus and address bus, and it can chew out through the data at the same rate that the Buffy can on the 16-bit bus, there's some challenges to scaling that up, obviously. But if you could go to that level, that's where I see, a drop-in replacement for an 060 that could go much, much faster. That's how I would do it, would be with the Buffy type solution.
Well, obviously, we've mentioned the Amiga stuff, the arcade stuff that you do in the MSX. I mean, would you consider other platforms, maybe stuff like the Acorn Archimedes or the classic Macs, or even, consoles like the Mega Drive?
I think the Acorn Archimedes I've kind of covered with my Mr. Lifetime. Maybe would do some. Maybe I could see myself doing like a memory expansion for that, because I have some of the logic for that already, and I've got it well understood. The classic Macs have never fascinated me. I don't know why. I've converted to Mac in the last couple of years to modern Macs, but the old Macs, I just have horrible memories of them quacking at me in labs in university.
Well, any new cards on the way then? Anything we should look out for that you're working on at the moment you can tell us about?
So everybody knows about the 1260. That's kind of made its way out there. That's the 1200 060 card. The 360, the sort of, it's like its little cousin or baby brother or something. That's not quite finished yet. The CD drive support's not working yet, but that will get done this year or early next year. Then there's the 4060, which is basically a thank you to Chucky Gang, because he hates doing those, what do you call them, the 3660s, the 3640 cards for the 4000s. They've got a like 400 gals on them or something like that. And he basically, whenever he's soldering one, I just get lots of swearing coming up on WhatsApp. So I've said, "Oh right, okay, I'll do you one. I'll port the 1260 to the 4000," and that kind of does work. That's kind of at the stage where it works on all of my machines, but it doesn't work for John. So I think Gadget UK's got one as well that he's going to demo off at some point. And I think that's about it in Amiga terms, apart from the TF1200, which is the adapter for Buffy.
Well, Stephen, I just want to say a big thank you to you for and the gang for keeping our machines going. And we talked about emulation before, but there's nothing like having the original hardware sometimes. And the fact that you're making stuff that can actually achieve these dreams. I always wanted stuff like an SX32 as a kid, but they were too expensive, and now I've kind of finally got my dream CD32 set up. And I think I speak for a lot of people when I say that we really appreciate all the work that you and the gang put in. So long may it continue, and thank you so much for coming on our podcast this week.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.